commenting strategically on people's content and also commenting in a way that actually is a sentence, not just, well done, thank you, looks awesome. But if you leave a genuine, again, remember, we're trying to have conversations here. So someone posts something and you find it interesting, leave a genuine, like think about if you're talking to that person, what would you actually say about what they'd just written or whatever you'd just seen? But that's how more people will come across you and find your profile. So it's not just about you post and then you leave. And actually, Alesia, about 3% of people on LinkedIn post, which is shocking. 97% of people who have a LinkedIn account never post anything at all. Like at all. They just lurk and scroll. That's it. So if you can get into the habit of writing a post once a week and commenting on other people's stuff, that gets you so much more visibility.
Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alesia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today on the podcast, we have Louise Brogan. You might know Louise. She is a top voice on LinkedIn content and all things LinkedIn. I first got connected with Louise's content back in 2018 when I discovered her podcast, and I was so excited when she said yes to be a guest on the show. Today, we are talking all things LinkedIn, but taking it a step further than our last episode that we had on LinkedIn, which we will make sure that we link in the show notes. This one, we are marrying this idea of LinkedIn and podcasting. How to create LinkedIn content that is going to connect with your audience and bring them into listening to your show in a very clean and clear and authentic way. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Louise to the podcast. Hello, Louise. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to chat with you. Before we get into today's topic, could you tell everyone who you are, what you do, and about your podcast?
Absolutely. So my name is Louise Brogan. I am a LinkedIn consultant. I run a LinkedIn marketing agency. We do LinkedIn content management for our clients. I have a podcast about LinkedIn, a YouTube channel about LinkedIn, and I also do training one-to-one and workshops on LinkedIn.
I love that. Yeah, that's very succinct and very obviously your focus is LinkedIn. Where did a podcast kind of fit into all of these plans when you were coming up with ideas to further promote your business and what it is that you do?
So I also need to tell people I'm from Northern Ireland. They might detect I don't have an American or North American accent. So actually my podcast predates my niche into LinkedIn, and it used to be called the Social Bee Podcast. So I started my business 10 years ago, 2013. And at that time, I was doing social media management and training for local companies here in Northern Ireland. Imagine like a restaurant or cafe who wanted their Facebook page managed for them or how to use Facebook for business. And I went on an accelerator course. So that I'm sure people have heard of those where you join a hub and you work with a mentor and there's a whole collective of you and it's about bringing your business up and raising your business and growing your business. And in that accelerator hub, one of the mentors, John, said to me, "Oh, have you ever listened to this podcast?" And I looked at him and I said, "What is a podcast?" Now, this was in Northern Ireland in about 2016. So yes, other countries knew what podcasts were. Nobody here did. So it was Seth Godin's podcast and I binged the whole thing. And I'm like, this is amazing. You can walk your dog and listen to people giving you like really useful information about your business. And I thought, I'd like a podcast. So I bought a microphone and I recorded a podcast and I called it the Social Bee Podcast. And because I love supporting small businesses and especially women who run their own business, my podcast was all interviews of women who were starting and running a business. And I would ask them how they got started and what advice they had for other people and that kind of stuff. And then when I niched down to LinkedIn in my business, I thought, well, it makes more sense for this podcast to be connected to LinkedIn. And that's when it changed. So that was about episode 95, 96. It changed to LinkedIn with Louise from being the Social Bee Podcast. So yeah, and I've been going ever since. It's about 5 years old, my podcast, which is kind of crazy, I think.
That is incredible. Wow. So fascinating. When you started your podcast, did you find, I'm thinking back to 2016, there's not a lot of information at that point about how to start a podcast. There
Correct.
Also aren't a lot of podcast
anything.
Like no way to put it on your website. You had Blueberry, which worked at the time with just WordPress. So if you didn't have your website on WordPress, then there's all of those other nuances to it. Now they're on other places as well, obviously. But yeah, those podcast hosting platforms, that's the word I was looking for. Podcast hosting platforms, there weren't a lot of them. Whereas now, you throw a stick and there's 15 of them. But that is so interesting. When you started podcasting, did you find that it was hard to get people, especially locally, to listen to the podcast? Or were you more so looking to reach new audiences in different countries?
Honestly, I was just looking to have conversations with people and to say I was a podcaster because when I first found podcasts, I fell down a rabbit hole massively and I loved them. And I thought I would like to do one of these too. So it was about meeting people and hearing their stories and amplifying their stories, I think partly. And I would have shared it on social media. I don't think I really got any local listeners. In fact, when somebody from Northern Ireland reached out to me and said they listened to my podcast, I was pretty shocked.
Wow.
Because I would have emailed about my podcast and my responses would have come from outside of Northern Ireland. So I would have got a lot of people from America who would contact me from the podcast. And that was amazing to be able to reach people in other countries just by sitting and recording something at your computer. And there wasn't a lot of options or software. So I used Libsyn and I am such a creature of habit. I've never moved away from it. I did find a local editor and I've worked with him since the very beginning and he still charges me the same price, which is phenomenal. Don't tell anybody.
Right.
And how did I get people out there? Do you know, have you heard of the Guardian newspaper?
Yes.
The Guardian is a massive broadsheet newspaper. I was one of their podcasts of the week.
Wow.
In 2018 or 19. And I honestly think it's because there are so few podcasts around. But I still have that badge of honor. I was in Guardian's podcast of the week. Now I wouldn't get near it now unless I was a celebrity. But yeah, yay, I was then.
And what a great way to be that was me. I was on there. That was so cool. And to have that as a badge of honor, right? Kind of combining your expertise on LinkedIn and being a podcaster. So we have had someone on to talk about LinkedIn, and that was more from a optimizing your profile standpoint. The person was not a podcaster themselves. So as a podcaster, I know that we tend to approach things a little differently than just your normal marketer. What are some ways that you would recommend that people who are podcasters use LinkedIn? And does it make sense for everyone to use LinkedIn?
I would say yes. I have worked with coaches, consultants, podcasters, speakers, corporates, small companies, product-based businesses, service-based businesses. I've worked with all of those people on LinkedIn. We mainly focus now on professionals, coaches, consultants, and service-based businesses, but I have worked with lots of other kinds of businesses. My approach to LinkedIn with a podcast. I actually pitched this to speak at a podcasting conference one time and they did accept it. Then I realized I had to pay my own flights and way over there. So it didn't work out. But here is my approach that I think podcasters should use for LinkedIn. First of all, build your network on LinkedIn of people who are interested in what you're going to be talking about. That's so important because if you just connect with anybody and everybody, and you put your podcast out there and say your podcast is about, let's think of as an example, a podcast for people who like to do yoga, maybe. or people over 50 who like to do yoga. There's no point in you connecting with anybody and everybody on LinkedIn because that's not who is going to get value from your podcast. So start building your network full of people who are going to be interested in what you're talking about in your podcast. And then here is a nice weekly strategy for podcasts and LinkedIn. Say your podcast comes out on a Wednesday. Let's just pretend. On the Monday of that week, you could do a post asking your audience a question about the topic that's coming out on the Wednesday podcast. So if we're going to talk about yoga for over 50s, on the Monday, the post could be, how do you find time to practice your yoga during your working week? And it could be a poll. So you'd have questions. Oh, I always schedule it, or I attend classes, or whatever it is. And that gets people thinking about, oh, yoga during the week. How do I do that? Then you say, make sure and check out the podcast on Wednesday. Then at Wednesday, here's the episode. And you say thanks to the people who contributed to your poll or your post on Monday. You say, thanks, Alesia. Thanks, Louise. I know you were interested in how to find time for yoga during your working week. Here's the podcast this week that talks to this topic. You might be interested in it. And then there's the podcast. And then on the Friday, you kind of pull it all together and you say, so this week, we started off by kind of thinking, how could we fit yoga into our working week? The podcast came out Wednesday, got some really interesting comments and conversations around that. Here are 3 key takeaways that you can use going forward as you try to practice yoga into your working week. And there's 3 posts that week, all connected to your podcast, all conversations starting with your audience about whatever your podcast topic is. And it could be anything. It could be how to find the right drill to make your home woodworking, whatever your topic is that you want to talk about in your podcast. But you can just start the conversation on the Monday, do the podcast on the Wednesday, and then kind of pull it all together and the key takeaways on the Friday. And there's your LinkedIn content for the week. And the people who are following you be like, why would I not be following Louise? Because I'm really interested in yoga or woodworking or whatever it is the topic is. So that is a nice little strategy, I think, for podcasts and LinkedIn marketing.
I love that so much because you're not being creepy. I feel like social media, there's so many creepy people out there who just like, they slide in your DMs and they're like, hey, I saw that you're this thing that I'm not. They don't even bother to like really look at your profile. I mean, I had someone say, hello, sir. Like I literally have she, her, I am a woman. It literally takes 2 seconds to check these things, guys.
Yeah.
And so like I have people, hey, Alesia, I heard, I support coaches. And I'm like, I'm not a coach. I run a podcast marketing agency and production company. Like I'm not a coach. Sorry. Also not sorry. Get out of my DMs. And so like there are a lot of creepy people out there who do these terrible tactics that I don't understand who's still teaching this because this is so like 2018. Stop doing this. Mm-hmm. And this way that you just expressed, it's inviting. It is not in any way, oh, you commented on this poll. Here is me selling you something. It's not that. It's inviting them into something that is free, something that is informational, and something that is supportive for them that does not involve them handing you cash in any way and can eventually lead to them handing you cash because you've built that rapport and that trust. And I love it. I love it so much because I think it's such a great strategy.
Well, I think, the way I teach people to use LinkedIn is about building relationships and building community. And you can't do that unless you're actually giving your community conversation topics that they want to talk about, that engages them. Again, why it's really important not to just connect with anybody and everybody, because one of my favorite analogies, Alesia, about LinkedIn is treat it like you would an in-person event. So if you just give me a sec to explain that. Say you and I are going to a podcasting conference. What do we do ahead of it? We get ourselves all prepared and ready. So we probably turn up at the conference dressed in the way we want people to see us in this network. Probably podcasting is quite chill. You've got your cool t-shirts and stuff and all that jazz. So that's how you present your LinkedIn personal profile. You show up in the way you want people to see you. Then before you get to the conference, you check out who else is going to be there. So you're looking to see who else is out there on LinkedIn you can connect with. Then when you arrive at the conference, you have certain speakers that you are really looking forward to hearing from. Those are the people or companies or the LinkedIn top voices that you want to follow on LinkedIn. Those are the people who are speaking at the conference. When you and I go and see our favorite speaker at the conference, we maybe sit down at the same table and we spark up a conversation. Well, that's the equivalent of you and I going onto LinkedIn, seeing our favorite podcasters just on a video, and we're in the comments below saying, really love that chat. And I see your name and I say, oh, there's Alesia. I think I met her at a previous conversation here on LinkedIn. And then you and I start having a conversation. Or you go and get coffee after the talk and you meet somebody in the queue and you say, hey, were you just at that talk? It's nice to meet you. I'm Louise, blah, blah, blah. Let's have a conversation. Let's exchange business cards or connect on LinkedIn. Same thing on LinkedIn. We've just both been to the same webinar, the same audio, the same whatever. We've been on LinkedIn and we found each other through a mutual interest. And we send each other a connection request with a message, because at the conference, you don't walk up to somebody, hand them your business card and walk away without speaking to them. So don't do that on LinkedIn either.
No.
So that, and then after the conference, you go home, I fly home back to Northern Ireland, and we keep in touch because we just met each other at this event where we both were following somebody interesting, topics we were interested in. And down the road, somebody says to you, oh, we need help with our LinkedIn. And you think, oh, I met Louise at that conference, or I saw Louise on LinkedIn. You should talk to her. And that's how building those relationships brings business without being spammy or salesy and without sending out 100 connection requests without any messages. It's like going to a conference, firing your business card around the room, not speaking to anybody and leaving without having actually had one decent conversation. So that's my favorite analogy about LinkedIn.
I love that. And that's such a great way to think about it. I saw someone posted a video, it might have been on LinkedIn, where they showed this guy who's like, if I were to walk up to people on the street and act like I was sliding into their DMs to sell them something. And it was so off-putting. And everybody was like, no, thank you. Please leave me alone. Go away. It's like, that's exactly how it feels, right? So like, I love the analogy. I love the strategies to kind of bring it all together. What are some other tips and tricks that we can use? Not even as podcasters. Yes, that's great. But as business owners, because most of the listeners, obviously they're using their podcast to turn their listeners into leads. And so how can we do that with LinkedIn specifically, even beyond the podcast?
Sure. So one of the key things a lot of people miss on LinkedIn is actually going and commenting on other people's stuff. So when your profile is fully optimized, and that's a whole different other area. I have loads of content on YouTube that people can just go and watch to do that themselves. When you've got a fully optimized profile and you comment on someone else's post, people will see your name, your photograph, and your headline. So people who are interested in what it is that you're doing will click on your name and go off to find out more about you in your About section. But also commenting strategically on people's content, and also commenting in a way that actually is a sentence, not just, well done, thank you, looks awesome. But if you leave a genuine, again, remember, we're trying to have conversations here. So someone posts something and you find it interesting, leave a genuine, like, think about if you're talking to that person, what would you actually say about what they'd just written or whatever you'd just seen? But that's how more people will come across you and find your profile. So it's not just about you post and then you leave. And actually, Alesia, about 3% of people on LinkedIn post, which is shocking. 97% of people who have a LinkedIn account never post anything at all. Like at all. They just lurk and scroll. That's it. Wow. So if you can get into the habit of writing a post once a week and commenting on other people's stuff, that gets you so much more visibility than people who just literally create a profile, go on and scroll around and just never really get seen by anybody. Writing a post, when you write a post, write it in a way that invites people to start a conversation. And the easiest way to do that is to ask a question. I mean, it's so simple. You could do a post and say, here's this week's podcast episode where I talked to Louise Brogan. She tells us this, 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 and this. And that's it. So instead of that, say, here's podcast episode from Louise Brogan. She shares this, this, and this. Have you ever tried this yourself? So people are much more likely to comment and leave comments.
I love the question, asking questions to invite people into the comments, to invite people into engaging. Now, this is just a very selfish question. Where do you recommend putting the question? Because I've seen it either at the top where before the more button, right? So
Yes.
asking something
Mhm.
like, does LinkedIn make you want to pull your hair out? Been there, done that. Yes. Like, you know what I mean? Something that invites like, yes, feelings, lots of feelings. Let's see what else she has to say. This week's episode, we have Louise Brogan. This is what we're talking about. This is a great takeaway that we have. Or do you recommend having it be, this week we have Louise Brogan, blah, 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 blah. Does LinkedIn make you feel like you want to pull your hair out? So where do you recommend kind of putting that question? Or is it a A/B testing? You put your heart and your soul into your show. And I want to help you reach all of those potential listeners out there. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming podcast marketing workshop. It's about giving you practical tools to grow your audience. You'll learn the secrets to getting your podcast discovered, attracting your dream listeners, and boosting those download numbers. This workshop will be hosted live with a replay available on April 30th. You can sign up by going to galatimedia.com/workshop. Let's grow our podcasts together.
So here's what I would do. Did you know that LinkedIn does XYZ? This week on the podcast, we have Louise Brogan. She shares tip ABC. Have you tried any of these? So you're kind of doing it at both ends. So in order to get people to click the see more button, and for anyone who's listening who think, what is she talking about? When you write more than 3 lines on LinkedIn, it then has this little clickable link that says see more. When you click on that, it opens up the full post. LinkedIn counts that as a engagement with your post. So you want to say something that people are intrigued enough to want to read the rest of your post. So you do want to start with a thing. Then the value in the post, which is where you're giving people valuable information, tips, advice, because people won't engage with your content if you're just talking about yourself.
Yeah.
Not really interested in you and what you have to do. They're interested in how you can help them. So then the end bit, I personally think it should always end with a question, if appropriate. It's not always appropriate, to be fair, but 90% of the time I would end with a question because that opens the conversation up. Again, if we go back to the conference, you and I just sat down beside each other and I'll say, are you having a nice time? Have you seen that Alesia's coming up on stage next? Have you heard of her? You know, and then the person will say, blah, 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 blah. And you say, yeah, no, I've not heard of her either. Apparently she's amazing. I can't wait to hear what she has to say. But you know how when we're having conversations, you don't go up to somebody and give them a statement of fact. You normally ask them, what do you think about that? Have you heard of her? What would you say? You know, it's not as casual as conversation, but do try and think about how can I turn this around into a conversation. I have to say, one of my favorite things to do in a training session is to take the client's last couple of posts and I literally copy and paste them, put them in as if I'm writing the post, and then show them how I would do it differently. And it's something we do. I do this thing called a LinkedIn VIP session where I help people redo their profile, help them understand how to use LinkedIn. And then we do 3 months of support where they send me their posts and I just literally tweak them, edit them, send them back. And yeah, it's good fun. I think in another life, I could have been an editor. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I think so often we either overthink or underthink how to connect with other people on social media and how to make that engagement. And I think that what you're talking about here in these strategies are also applicable on places like Instagram where they have the see more, on places like Facebook where they have the see more, other platforms where we can talk about our podcast and use these same strategies to connect with other people. So I love this so much.
It's called social media because you're supposed to be social with people. You're not supposed to broadcast at them.
Yes. So you have gotten some clients from your podcast. What has that strategy kind of looked like for you when it comes to the content that you're creating with your podcast and then kind of taking those listeners and turning them into leads for your business?
I don't know who taught me this. I learned this up about 3 years ago and people have commented on it. Like coaches I've worked with have commented on it since. But peppering examples of how you work with people throughout your podcast episodes. So telling stories during your episode. So eagle-eyed ears might have noticed that I literally just, in that last example, I shared how we work with people. I could easily share a story, like someone saying, Louise, what could you put in your profile that would make a difference? And I would give an example of a client that I'd worked with. And when I did this with Vienna, we did this, and then she got booked for these speaking opportunities. And it's done in a very natural way. It's not like, can I please fire something in to sell my services here at the end? So because podcasting is conversational, and even if it's just you with no guest, I kind of feel like I'm talking to my listener. Yeah. I've got more than one listener. But sometimes I listen back to myself and I think, you're a wee bit too casual there, Louise. It's literally like you're talking to a person. But I think that's what people like about podcasts. And no, not everybody's personality suits everybody else, but definitely weaving in the story of, there's a thing about company. I've literally just done a video about company pages and posted it onto my own personal LinkedIn profile. And it's about one of the things I could talk about in my podcast is, so I created a video, and because I'm trying something new. It's a vertical video and it's got captions at the bottom, and the captions are larger because that's going to be easier for people to read and it gives accessibility, et cetera, et cetera. And that would be a way of dropping in the fact that we are doing video, and I'm doing video with clients. But rather than saying in the podcast, so we are now doing video with our clients, and if you're interested, reach out. And I do of course do that sometimes at the end because you've got to sell a little bit too. But giving the example of, I posted this video, I added the captions, I tried something new with a vertical video, and it got 10 times more reach. So I think that's something you should try out yourself. People are interested because I'm telling them something they can take and use. But subconsciously, they're also hearing, Louise and her company do video on LinkedIn with their clients. And it just kind of sits there without me selling the actual service. So I think that's something that has really worked well for me, kind of just weaving those stories in. I don't tend to sell my service. I probably don't sell my services enough, to be honest, on the podcast. But it's just the way it is. It's the way my podcast is, and it's who I am, and that's fine. But another great way to showcase what you do is to bring in people you've worked with and interview them on your podcast. And that is actually what we've done. That's coming up next week. I've worked with a lady in Ireland. She has just come back from a conference in America that she found out about through her LinkedIn network. And she was talking to me about it privately in private messages because we worked together a couple of years ago and we've become friends since. And I said, that would be a really interesting podcast episode because I think other people who work in the coach consultant space would be quite interested to see how you did that. And she got booked to speak at a conference in London and one in Vienna. Like, what? Why am I not getting booked to speak in Vienna? That would be very nice. But we did a whole episode about that. And it's obvious from the way I interview her that we work together. And she mentioned something that we did together. So a listener would know that. But the episode is about helping. And it is an episode really for people in the coaching consulting space. The episode is really delivering value to those people to understand how they can be leveraging LinkedIn to get themselves more visibility, to get speaking gigs and to win business. But the fact that she's a client of mine does me no harm either.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. We've definitely used those strategies. And I have told people so many times, give those examples. If you are talking about something, share how you did that with a client. It's the easiest and most natural way to sell your stuff. And then make sure you tell them at the end, take action, right? Just like these LinkedIn posts, having that question at the end, inviting people in to potentially work with you or to download that freebie or to watch that video, right? Tell them what they need to do next. This has been so good. Louise, where can people find you, hang out with you, get to know you, stalk you? Maybe don't send creepy DMs.
Stalk me. So I'm over on LinkedIn, of course. It's Louise Brogan, and I have a free download if people would like to. Hello, free download. We just talked about that. Which is a guide on how to use LinkedIn, basically. And it's, you just go to louisebrogan.com/download, and that people can grab a copy of that if they want to get stuck into using LinkedIn for their podcast and their business. They'd be very welcome to it.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so excited for this to go out.
Yay. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alesia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.